Your Honor, I assure you that these allegations are completely unfounded. My only interest was protecting the company's assets, as is my fiduciary duty.
Hello, I am Judge Boyd. For over 30 years, I have sat behind this heavy mahogany bench, serving as a silent observer of the human condition in its most hazardous and its most deceitful states. Many believe that a judge's job is merely to read the law. They are wrong. My job is to decipher the subtle architecture of lies that people build to shield themselves from the gravity of their own choices. In this courtroom, words are often just a veil. I don't listen to what they say. I watch 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 what they say. Bodies betrayed. Before we peel back the layers of today's case, a chilling story of a man who thought he was smarter than the system itself, I have a request for you. If you are someone who values the cold, unvarnished truth over the comforting illusions we are often fed in this world, then please subscribe to this channel and like this video. It ensures that these deep analyses of power, accountability, and human behavior reach those who truly seek understanding in an age of performance. I remember my early days as a young prosecutor. My mentor, a man who could smell a lie from a mile away, once told me, "Boyd, the law is a mirror. Most people hate what they see in it, so they try to break the glass or cover it with a painting of their own making." I never forgot that lesson. Today, we look at a man who didn't just try to hide from the mirror, but tried to convince the world that the mirror was broken. His name was Arthur Sterling. When Arthur Sterling walked into my courtroom, he carried himself with the practiced ease of a man who had spent his entire life being told yes. He was impeccable. The tailored charcoal suit, the expensive silk tie, the calm, measured voice of a person who believes they own the room. To the untrained eye, he was the picture of a respectable, high-status citizen caught in a minor misunderstanding with the authorities. But as I sat there, I didn't see a pillar of the community. I saw the calculated stillness of a predator. I watched his face as the clerk read the charges. Driving 95 miles per hour in a marked school zone, an unregistered vehicle with blacked out plates, and a history of disappeared citations that suggested a man who thought the rules were for the little people. Most defendants are nervous. They fidget. They sweat. Sterling was different. He was too still. He sat with a sense of arrogant entitlement that mocked the very air in this room. He didn't realize that I was already reading his human map. I saw the micro-tension in his jaw and the cold, predatory flash in his eyes every time the officer spoke. He wasn't just breaking traffic laws, he was mocking the social contract. He had a secret, a deep rot he thought his wealth could buy silence for. He didn't realize that in my court, the mask is the first thing we removed before we delivered the final warning. Arthur's attorney, Mr. Harrison, stood up with the practiced grace of a man who had made a career out of polishing tarnished reputations. His voice was like velvet, smooth and soothing, designed to lull the court into a state of sympathetic boredom. He spoke of Arthur's unblemished record, his generous donations to local hospitals, and his immense pressure as a CEO. He framed the 95 miles per hour speed in a school zone not as a reckless act of ego, but as a momentary lapse in judgment by a man burdened with the weight of saving hundreds of jobs. But while Harrison was weaving this tapestry of lies, I wasn't looking at him, I was looking at Arthur. You see, a man can hire the best voice in the state to speak for him, but he cannot hire a new nervous system. I watched the pulse in Arthur's carotid artery. It was steady, too steady. A normal person, even a wealthy one, feels a flicker of shame when a judge mentions a school zone where children play. But Arthur, his pulse didn't skip a beat. To him, the children weren't human beings. They were merely obstacles in his path to a board meeting. I leaned forward, my eyes locking on to him. In my years of study, I've learned that the eyes are the primary indicators of a deception map. Arthur had what I call the predator's unblink. He stared at the back of the officer's head with a cold, calculating intensity. He wasn't afraid of the law. He was offended that the law dared to interrupt him today. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice cutting through his lawyer's flowery rhetoric like a scalpel. "Your attorney tells me you were in a rush to save your company, but your car had blacked out plates, professionally installed covers designed to reflect speed camera flashes. That isn't a lapse in judgment. That is a premeditated strategy to exist above the law. I saw it then, a micro expression. For a fraction of a second, the corner of his left lip curled upward. It was the duper's delight. It's the involuntary thrill a liar feels when they think they've outsmarted the person in front of them. He thought those blacked out plates were a stroke of genius, a secret weapon that made him invisible. He didn't realize that in my courtroom, being invisible is the loudest way to scream your guilt. I looked at the gallery. I saw the faces of grandparents, people of your age, who know the value of a community's safety. They felt the chill in the room. They knew, as I did, that this wasn't about a speeding ticket. This was about a man who had spent decades hiding a rot behind a curtain of money. And as I looked back at Arthur, I realized the blacked out plates weren't just for cameras. They were a metaphor for his entire life. He was hiding something much darker than a traffic violation, and I was going to make sure the light of this courtroom burned right through it. In my 3 decades on this bench, I have developed a specialized skill. I read the human map. Your face is a diary of every lie you've ever told and every fear you've tried to bury. As I looked at Arthur Sterling, I noticed the vertical lines between his eyebrows, not lines of age, but lines of chronic, suppressed rage. This was a man used to exert his will over others, a man who viewed the world as a game he had already won. But there was a shadow in his story. The arresting officer had mentioned a large, locked briefcase on the passenger seat. When that briefcase was mentioned, Arthur's hand did something his lawyer's silver tongue couldn't cover. His thumb pressed firmly against his index finger, a self-soothing gesture used by people who are physically holding on to a secret they cannot afford to lose. "Mr. Sterling," I said, leaning closer to the microphone, my voice dropping to a cold, resonant frequency. "We've talked about your speed. We've talked about your plates. Now, let's talk about your destination. You weren't just driving to somewhere. You were driving away from something, weren't you?" The silence that followed was suffocating. I watched the skin around his eyes. In the 50 to 80-year-old demographic, the skin loses its elasticity, but it gains a peculiar honesty. The micro muscle at the corner of his left eye twitched. It was a fear spike. A man doesn't show fear over a speeding ticket when he has millions in the bank. He shows fear when the rot he has hidden for 20 years is about to be exposed to the light of day. I turned to the gallery. I saw the eyes of the honest taxpayers, the people who worked 40 years and retired with dignity. They could sense it too. They know that when a man like Arthur Sterling mocks the law, he isn't just being arrogant, he is being desperate. Desperation is the smell of a dying lie. "Your Honor," his lawyer interrupted, his voice now slightly higher in pitch, a clear sign of secondary deception. "My client's private property and destinations are irrelevant to a traffic citation." "In this court, Mr. Harrison," I replied, "relevance is determined by the truth. Your client didn't just speed, he fled. And he fled with a briefcase that he refused to let the officer touch, even during a lawful stop. Mr. Sterling, look at me." Arthur finally met my gaze. I saw the predator's void, that hollow space in the eyes where empathy should be. But deeper within that void, I saw a flicker of the moral panic. He realized I wasn't looking at his suit. I was looking at his soul. And his soul was screaming. He was mocking the law because the law was the only thing that could stop the secret from reaching its final, devastating destination. The warning I was about to give him wasn't just about his license, it was about the collapse of the empire of lies he called his life. In the world Arthur Sterling came from, money doesn't just buy comfort, it buys a version of reality. As I sat there, I watched his attorney, Mr. Harrison, launch into a technical objection about unlawful search and seizure. It was a masterclass in legal obfuscation. But while the air was filled with high-priced words, the truth was written in the way Arthur was gripping the edge of the mahogany table. His knuckles were white, a blood drainage response. When the body perceives a terminal threat, it pulls blood away from the extremities to protect the vital organs. Arthur wasn't just angry anymore. He was in survival mode. "Mr. Harrison," I interrupted, my voice as cold as a winter morning in New England. "Your client wasn't stopped for a broken taillight. He was stopped for a high-speed flight that endangered a school zone. The blacked-out plates establish criminal intent to evade. That briefcase isn't just private property. In the context of a flight, it is potential evidence of the motive behind that flight. Mr. Sterling, you are a man of logic. Tell me, why does a respectable CEO need to hide his identity and risk a felony to deliver a briefcase at 95 miles per hour? I watched the human map again. This time I looked at his jaw. The masseter muscle, the strongest muscle in the human body, was bulging. This is the suppression lock. He was literally biting back the truth. For those of you watching, especially those who have spent observing people, you know that silence has a sound. In that courtroom, the silence sounded like a crumbling building. I turned my gaze to the gallery. I saw a group of retirees, men and women who had spent 40 years following the rules, paying their taxes, and raising their families. They were leaning forward. They weren't there for the drama. They were there for the accountability. They wanted to see if the golden shield of wealth could actually stop the sword of justice. I could feel their collective heartbeat. They were the silent jury of the community's conscience. Arthur finally spoke. His voice was lower, grainier, what we call vocal fry, a sign of extreme vocal cord tension due to stress. It's just documents, Your Honor. Trade secrets. Nothing more. I didn't blink. Trade secrets don't cause a man's hands to shake, Mr. Sterling. Trade secrets don't lead to blacked out plates. You didn't mock the law because you were in a hurry. You mocked the law because you believed your status made you immune to the consequences of whatever is inside that leather bag. You thought you could outrun the camera, out-talk the officer, and outbuy the court. But you forgot one thing. The law has no eyes for your bank account. It only has eyes for your actions. At that moment, the court officer reached toward the briefcase to secure it. Arthur's entire body flinched. It was a startled response, so violent it almost knocked his chair over. The mask was gone. The impeccable CEO was replaced by a disenchanted man who knew that his empire was built on a foundation of sand. The secret wasn't in the speed. The secret was the rot that the speed was trying to outrun. And I was about to order that bag opened. Arthur's flinch was a confession in biological form. When the court officer's hand finally touched that leather handle, the CEO of the year disappeared instantly, replaced by a man whose nervous system had just gone into a full-scale, panicked retreat. I watched the sweat begin to bead at his hairline, what I call the truth leak. You see, you can pay $1,000 for a haircut and $10,000 for a suit, but your pores will always tell the truth when your soul is cornered. They are the body's final, honest witnesses. I gestured for the officer to proceed. The silence in the courtroom changed from heavy to electrified. I looked over at the gallery, at the rows of gray hair and weathered faces, men and women of your age, who have spent a lifetime building this country with their hands and their integrity. They weren't even looking at the briefcase anymore. They were looking at Arthur's eyes. They were witnessing the precise, microscopic moment an empire built on ego begins to implode from within. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it echoed like a thunderclap in the absolute stillness of the room. You told this court these were trade secrets. You told us your speed was an act of sacrifice for your employees. But trade secrets are kept in secure vaults, not in blacked-out cars fleeing through school zones where children play. You weren't protecting a company today, Arthur. You were protecting a corpse. The officer clicked the latches. The sound was metallic, sharp, and final. As the lid opened, Arthur's eyes didn't look at the contents. They looked at me. It was the plea of the damned. He was searching my face for a price, a loophole, a way to make Judge Boyd see things his way. He found nothing but the cold, unyielding reflection of his own deceit. Inside that bag weren't just documents. They were the leaders of a parallel life. We found evidence of a systematic, decades-long siphon that had been quietly draining the pensions of the very employees his lawyer had just praised him for saving. This was never a traffic case. This was the final chapter of a 20-year masquerade. Arthur Sterling didn't mock the law because he felt important. He mocked the law because he was a thief who believed his crown was too heavy to ever be taken. I saw the moral shock ripple through the gallery as the first ledger was held up. For those of you watching who have worked 40 years for a pension, who have sacrificed your vacations for a quiet retirement, this is the ultimate betrayal. This man didn't just speed past your grandson's school. He was speeding towards the finish line of a grand theft of your future. The secret was out, and the final warning I was about to deliver was no longer about a car or a license. It was about the cold, hard floor of reality finally meeting a man who thought he could fly forever on stolen wings. There is a specific phenomenon I have observed in high-stakes fraudsters when the game is finally over. I call it the asymmetric collapse. As the details of the pension were read into the record, Arthur's face began to lose its structural integrity. The left side of his mouth dipped slightly lower than the right. This isn't a brain's inability to maintain a performance while the primitive limbic system is screaming danger. The energy required to maintain the lie had been redirected to the survival instinct, leaving the mask to crumble in real time. I looked back at you, the people in the gallery. I saw Mary, a 72-year-old woman who had worked 30 years as a floor manager at Arthur's plant. Her eyes weren't filled with rage. They were filled with a profound, quiet disbelief. To people like Mary, and to many of you watching, the law isn't a game to be mocked. It is the floor we all walk on. When someone like Arthur saws through that floor, he isn't just stealing money. He is stealing the very ground beneath your feet. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy air, look at the faces behind you, not the lawyers you pay, but the lives you broke. You didn't just speed through a school zone because you were arrogant. You were speeding because every second you remained, Arthur Sterling, the successful CEO, was another second you didn't have to face the ghost of who you really are, a man who traded the dignity of thousands for a charcoal suit and blacked out plates. I watched his throat. He was swallowing repeatedly, the dry mouth reflex. When the body is in a state of high moral panic, it shuts down non-essential functions like salivation. He tried to speak, but his voice was gone. He was breathless, not from running, but from the weight of the air in this room. Every breath he took was now filled with the scent of his own exposure. The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, tried to whisper in his ear, but Arthur pulled away. He was now in the island state, that psychological isolation where even your closest allies look like enemies. He realized that the gold on his wrist couldn't buy a single second of mercy in a court that values the human map over the balance sheet. You see, for the 50 to 80-year-old viewer, justice isn't about vengeance. It's about the restoration of order. It's about knowing that the rules still apply to those who think they are gods. I could feel the room exhaling. The mockery had ended. The predator was now his prey-own history. The final warning I was preparing wasn't just for him. It was a message to the world that in this courtroom, the shadow of a secret can never outrun the light of the law. Arthur, look at me one last time. In my court, I don't just see a defendant. I see a legacy in ruins. I watched your hands as the names of the families you defrauded were read aloud. You weren't clenching them anymore. They were limping. This is the terminal resignation. It's the moment the brain finally accepts that the golden shield has shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. You spent 40 years building a monument to your own ego, only to realize that the law is the one thing your checkbook couldn't edit out of existence. To those of you watching, especially those who have seen the world change over the last 6 decades, you know that the greatest theft isn't money, it's trustworthy. We live in a society built on the invisible handshake. When a man like Arthur mocks the law, he spits on every hour of overtime you worked, every sacrifice you made for your children's future. He didn't just drive 95 miles per hour. He tried to outrun the very concept of being a decent human being. I saw a final sign on his human map, the shoulder drop. His posture had lost its verticality. When a man's pride is authentic, his spine stays straight, even in defeat. But when a man's pride is a lie, he collapses inward like a hollow shell. Arthur wasn't just losing his freedom. He was losing the illusion that he was better than the people he robbed. He was finally just a man, standing in the cold light of accountability, shivering in a suit that could no longer hide his poverty of spirit. Your Honor, his lawyer tried to intervene one last time. His voice cracked a sign of advocate's fatigue. We ask for leniency based on his age and his contributions. Leniency, Mr. Harrison? I replied, my voice echoing with the weight of every broken promise in those ledgers. Leniency is for the desperate who make mistakes. It is not for the predatory who makes plans. Mr. Sterling didn't make a mistake. He made a career out of betrayal. He uses the law as a toy and the community as a harvest. I looked at the gallery. I saw the quiet nodding of heads. For you, the viewers at home, this is the moment of moral restoration. You need to know that even in a world that feels increasingly chaotic, there is a place where the truth still has teeth. Arthur Sterling thought he was the architect of his own universe. He forgot that the law is the gravity that eventually brings everyone back to earth. My final warning was no longer a whisper. It was the gathering storm of a verdict that would echo through the lives of everyone he touched. The mockery is over. The reckoning has arrived. Arthur Sterling, the time for performance is over. You came into this courtroom as a titan of industry, but you leave it as a cautionary tale. You mocked the law because you believed that money could buy a separate sky to live under one where the clouds are made of gold and the rules are for the people on the ground. Today, that sky has fallen. I am judging you to the maximum penalty allowed under the law for your reckless endangerment and the felony evasion. But more importantly, I am turning over these ledgers to the federal authorities. The stolen futures of the thousands of families you robbed will be the walls of the cell you live in for the rest of your days. You thought you were outrunning a camera. You were actually outrunning the inevitable reach of justice. And here is my final warning. It is not just for Arthur Sterling. It is for anyone who sits in a high office and thinks that their status is a shield. It is for anyone who believes that because they have a tailored suit, they can trample on the invisible handshake that holds our society together. The law is patient. It is silent. Silent. But it is gravity. You can jump as high as your bank account allows, but eventually you will come back down to the earth of accountability. To those of you watching, especially those who have seen the values of integrity and hard work be mocked in this modern age, do not lose heart. This trial is proof that the human map does not lie. The truth is a stubborn thing. It waits in the shadows, it waits in the pores of a sweating face, and it waits in the metallic click of a briefcase. Arthur, you may have blacked out your plates, but you could never black out the eyes of the law. You are no longer a CEO, you are a number. And the community you mocked will be the one that watches as your empire is dismantled to pay back every cent of the dignity you stole. This case is closed. But the lesson remains. In this courtroom and in this life, you can hide a secret for 20 years, but you cannot hide it from the final second of reckoning. Sleep well, Mary. Sleep well, honest workers. The law has seen you, and today the law has fought for you. I am Judge Boyd, and this is the end of the masquerade.